Hello. So in this video for Black History Month, we're going to talk about August Wilson's play Fences. I do want to say first off that infirmity has once again laid me waste, so I'm going to try and get through this with a minimum of sniffling and coughing and whatnot, but we'll see how I do. Fences. So Wilson is one of Pennsylvania's greatest playwrights, my current state of residence. Wilson is from Pittsburgh, which is a great city in Pennsylvania. He, I would say, is probably at the very least, top 5 greatest African-American playwrights. Debatably at least top 3, some would say. So August Wilson, he's this really, really influential African-American playwright, in part because one of the things that he did over a very long stretch of his career was he wrote these decade plays where each of the plays is set in a different decade of the 20th century, and they dramatize an aspect of the African-American experience. They were not written in order, but that doesn't really matter. And Fences is one of those. Fences is the play for the 50s. It's set in Pittsburgh, as most of Wilson's plays are, and it basically follows Troy Maxson, who's this very large guy. He is an ex-con. He's made the difficult journey from the sharecropper South, where he was a child with his abusive father, whom he escaped out from under, and he made his way up to Pittsburgh, and he lived in poverty. He was homeless. He had become a thief and ended up murdering someone and went to prison, and then in prison learned to become a great baseball player. And when he got out of prison, he basically vowed to go straight, and he did that ever since. Along with Troy, so he's now in his 50s. And part of the reason that is important is because it was really during the 50s that the color barrier was broken in baseball. And or late 40s and in the 50s, sort of increasing numbers of baseball players of color were brought into the formerly all-white major leagues. And this is a big deal because Troy, at least as he tells it, could have been as good or better as anybody in the majors. And so there's this, but by the time Jackie Robinson was brought into the Pittsburgh Pirates, the sort of official breaking of the color barrier for Major League Baseball, Troy was too old to play in the majors. So there's this tremendous resentment that he has because he feels that he was denied this opportunity. He's also worked very hard in a relatively degrading job as a garbage collector, and he feels that he is sort of entitled to authority over his family. So he's a complex character, and he really is the driving force of the play. In many ways, it is a kind of psychological study of Troy Maxson, who himself stands in for these sort of accumulated spheres of African American experience common in the mid-20th century. Alongside Troy is Rose, his wife, and she's a difficult character to sort of pin down, which seems to be pretty consistent across a lot of Wilson's female characters. He primarily writes male characters, it seems, or wrote male characters. He's no longer alive, unfortunately, but he primarily wrote male characters. But Rose, I actually think, is quite an interesting one because she is the long-suffering but supportive wife of Troy. She is very aware of his faults, of his shortcomings, of his limitations as a human being, etc., etc. And yet she stands by him up to the point 18 years into their marriage, where he, in the latter portion of this play, comes to her and says, I've been having an affair, and the woman is having my child. And with that, Rose really basically sort of says, you should not have done this. After everything that I have done for you, after I have stood by you despite all of your faults and limitations, you should have stood by me despite all of my faults and limitations. And when the woman dies in childbirth, this woman who has Troy's illegitimate daughter, Rose agrees to raise the daughter, but she does basically say to him, you are a womanless man. So they continue to live together. She continues to cook for him, keep house for him, raise his children, etc., etc., but she no longer considers herself his wife, which I actually think is quite a good gesture for a playwright who's not necessarily regarded as writing great female characters. In addition to this, there are Troy's two sons. There's Leon, who is in his mid-30s, and he wants to be a musician, and he seems to be sort of a jazz musician, but he also doesn't seem... He's hard to pin down, because he sort of comes on, basically says, hey, Pop, can I borrow some money? Or, hey, Pop, I've come to pay you back the money that you lent me. And that's the majority of what he seems to do. There does seem to be a sense that Troy is disappointed in what Leon has become, because Troy seems to think that what a real man needs to do is to get a practical blue-collar type job where you work hard and you earn a steady paycheck, etc., etc., right? Something that... And this really comes to the forefront with his younger son, Corey, because Corey is a football player, and he is being offered a scholarship to the University of North Carolina. I think. I don't remember if it's specified. It is specified that the school is in North Carolina, but So he's been offered a scholarship to go to college and play football. But the recruiter basically has to come by and talk to Troy about it. And Troy essentially says no. He said, no, Corey, you cannot play football. White people who control the teams will never actually allow you to play. You will waste your time. You will waste your youth. What you need to do is get skills so that you can get a job, so that you can support yourself. And Corey and Rose and his friend Bono all try to convince Troy that times are changing and that athletes of color are, in fact, playing in the major leagues, and increasingly so, and Troy just refuses to believe this. There is this sort of sense in which he is stuck in the past, or maybe more accurately, in which the only cognitive model that he has room for in his head is his own experience of suffering and deprivation and grief. And he insists that this would be the experience of his son. And so, in a debatably misguided attempt to protect his son from that experience of deprivation and grief and having his dreams crushed, Troy deprives his son of his dream to play football. So, it is this sort of thing, right, where it's this strange paradox, and this is one of the things that's also central to the play, is this sort of these questions of what it means to be a man, what it means to be an African-American man, what it means to be a father or a son, because Troy does reflect on how terrible his father was, and the ways in which his father's abuse colored Troy's experience of life and of expectations and of what and of the kinds of relationships that one should have with one's family. Right, like at one point, Corey asks Troy, why did you never like me? And Troy is incensed at the question. He's incensed that Corey would even expect or hope that his father would like him. He just, this drives Troy nuts. And he basically says, I've done everything for you. I have worked for 18 years, your whole life. I have put food on the table. I have put a roof over your head. I've ensured you have a bed to sleep in. I've made sure you have clothes to wear. All of this stuff. No one ever said I had to like you. I'm under no obligation to do that. And on the one hand, that's true, right? A parent has an obligation to care for their child, to protect them, take care of them, provide for their material needs, etc., etc. If as a parent you don't particularly like your child, that's life. That happens. But the idea that it's not even something Troy would ever consider is quite striking. And it does it does really say much about the sort of gap between physiological needs and emotional needs, because children do have emotional needs. We as human beings have emotional needs to be loved, to feel like part of a family, to feel like part of a community, etc., etc. All of these things. These are part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, famously, right? And indeed, Troy, when he's trying to explain to Rose why he has gone and had this affair with this other woman, he does put it in terms of emotional needs, right? So he talks about, like, with her, I can go and I can laugh and feel free. It's this kind of thing, right? He does not, when he's with this other woman, have all of these problems of the family weighing down on him. He does not need to worry about money, about paying the bills, about making sure that everyone gets fed, etc., etc. He doesn't, that responsibility is not there, and that need for freedom is a human need as well. It's an emotional need that we have. And again, it's this really interesting play because you have these sort of conflicting elements in which these conflicting elements mostly within Troy himself, where on the one hand he clearly understands emotional, non-tangible needs, but whenever his son attempts to claim an emotional or non-tangible need from him, he can only respond in terms of physical needs, practical needs. And yeah, it's such an interesting play because Troy is such a complex and multifaceted and contradictory character. He's really, really interesting. He's really, really an interesting guy. Not a likable guy, I would say, but interesting.